Okay, hello. We're Team 2, and we're analyzing Operation Margarine, The Media is the Message. And our team is made up of Noah, Maya, and me, Isabelle. So in Barthes' essay titled Operation Margarine, he starts by referring to what is known as the established order. We can think of this as a global system that consists of the players who maintain control over the general public. Within the system, the idea of Operation Margarine is used to deal with discontent. So Operation Margarine is taking the idea you want to restore or develop, point out all of its flaws, and then at the last moment, save face in spite of all its problems. Some examples he uses in the essay are the army and the church. He takes, for example, how people will talk about the army and acknowledge all the horrors of war, only to go back and wave an American flag and say how our country's greatness is based on the success of it. Next slide. So Operation Margarine is in reference to an old margarine commercial, and the commercial starts with cries against the product, and these critiques serve to make your conscience more willing to the following statements that will turn around to exalt the product at the last minute. To connect this margarine commercial to the order as a whole, Barthes states, in regards to this commercial, why does it matter after all if margarine is just fat when it goes further than butter and costs less? And in regards to the established order as a whole, what does it matter after all if the order is a little brutal or a little blind when it allows us to live cheaply? Next slide. Barthes then goes on to define what he identifies as rhetorical forms of the bourgeois myth. This starts with the inoculation. He talks about how by admitting slight faults, small doses instead of all at once, it lightens the severity of the issue as a whole and hides any greater evils. This saves the general public from complete subversion to whatever idea they're trying to push. Next is the privation of history. Myth deprives the object of its history. It wants the person to simply enjoy this object without wondering where it came from, be kept in the dark so as to not question it further. Number 3 is identification. The bourgeois man identifies himself and those like him separately from the quote-unquote other. This other is reduced to sameness, quote, a scandal that threatens his essence, end quote. And at the very most, a pure object, a spectacle. Number 4 is tautology. This means to define like by like. For example, saying that drama is drama. One takes refuge in tautology when they don't have an explanation, but can only take refuge behind authority. For example, a parent saying to their child, just because, that's all, or that's just how it is. There's what he calls a double murder. Quote, one kills rationality because it resists one kills the language because it betrays one, end quote. Number 5 is neither norism. This means to balance two opposites and make them seem equal so as to make it easier to reject them both. Number 6, the quantification of quality. By reducing quality to quantity, this is how myths understand reality more cheaply. And number 7 is a statement of fact. The foundation for bourgeois statement of fact is, quote, common sense. Bourgeois ideology is based on universalism, the refusal of explanation, and a fixed hierarchy of the world. It uses aphorism, which are concise statements of principle, to overlay statements already made and make them seem as if they're self-evident in their longevity. It's the equivalent of tautology, but more decorous, the counter-explanation. Each of these rhetorics fall into one of two categories, the essences and the scales. But all in all, he argues that bourgeois ideology is in the fullest sense a prohibition for man against inventing himself. In the following section, Barthes begins to outline the necessity and limits of mythology. He states, founded on a responsible idea of language, mythology thereby assumes the freedom of it. In it, he writes that the mythologist cuts himself off from all myth consumers. When the myth reaches the entire community, the mythologist can only estrange himself from it if he wants to liberate it. And now Maya will go on with the next part.
So, speaking of mythologists, they themselves cannot speak about the reality that we live in. Ideology is basically a collection of ideas or beliefs shared by a group of people. They give a good example of why mythologists do not contribute to our reality. They state that he deals with the goodness of wine, but not the wine itself. Anyone else is allowed to speak on this, but the mythologist is restricted to their meta language, sort of how like school principals or deans manage the whole school, but do not interact with each and every student. This is what mythologists do. Next slide, please. To conclude, the media is the message. At the end of this essay, Operation Margarine, the media is a message, it ends off with stating that we are in a continuous battle between reality and humans. We are basically in a constant fight between choosing the red or blue pill, like how our professor was saying in last week's lecture. We are unable to grasp the reality because we are in a constant state of alienation. In the film The Matrix, they have to decide between the two. You can either choose the red pill to see the truth of life in present time, or choose the blue pill to stay comfortable in your own ignorance. When you look it up, the most common way they state this is if you take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland and they show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Or if you take the blue pill, the story ends, you wake up in your bed, and you believe whatever you want to believe. Next slide, please. And to begin the next section, The Medium is a Message by Marshall McLuhan. We shift our thinking from ideology to where the ideas come from. It is a medium that shapes and controls the scale and form of human association and action. Everyone experiences different mediums around them depending on their environment. A big one that we encounter on a daily basis that people often overlook is electric light. People often forget that electric light is in fact a medium. McLuhan calls us out on saying that this is an instant on how people fail to study media at all. This is often overlooked because the electric light has no content. It isn't really noticed until it is being used to either light up a classroom or used in a surgery room. Next slide, please. Now, thinking deeper with media study, Hans Selye, author of The Stress of Life, claims that you have to approach media study with not only content, but the medium and the cultural matrix. We are often unaware of the psychic and social effects that the media has on us. We are quick to assume one thing, if it's either bad or good, but we should be looking at the bigger picture because sometimes it's neither. A relatable example from the reading that helped me understand this concept better was that firearms are in themselves neither good or bad. It is the way they are used that determines their value. So that was just a good example from the reading. And I'll pass it on to Noah now.
Okay. Medium is the message. So getting to the point. An example of getting to the point is Twitter. Twitter gives you only a certain amount of character content that you can write. So basically you got to get right to the point. It's shaving the fat off and getting exactly to what you need to be told and said. So for an example, apparently, according to Napoleon, 3 hostile newspapers are more to be feared than 1,000 bayonets. What Napoleon means by this is that newspapers in writing can stretch and reach way more people than what some guns can do. Newspapers and media, they connect the whole world, and speech is much greater. Typography, the style and appearance of printed matter, talks about the sizes and fonts, the way people visualize and see and determine what they want to know and how the message is being conveyed. Visuals and tones are also a big achiever to getting people to notice something. If there's a big ring or applauding, you know you did well. But if there's some sad tone, you know, like the message is not supposed to be a good one. Okay. So typography. What is typography? The design theory and art of creating characters for printing. So typography is the different types of fonts, sizes, letters, just to make something stick out. Understanding the grammar of typography. If you're understanding the grammar, you can get through what an author is trying to convey to you by just reading what is on the paper, not the big fonts and the fancy words. And the effect typography has on people can be drastic because many people are attracted to nice things, and so big fancy words make people more in tune to listen to somebody compared to just a boring word. The effect media has on us. So how media has shaped history over the years, last 200 years, media has become huge. from the beginning when people were just meeting in mess halls and everything to talk. Now they have newspapers, television, radio that can get everywhere in the country, and their messages can get far spread. And the different types of forms of media would be like newspaper, radio, TV, and fixed charges. Fixed charges are where it's a stimulus for us. So if you're watching TV and you like something, it gives you sort of a connection to the show. And that is all a part of how media can affect someone. And then questions to think about. So go ahead and you can pause the video right now and think about these questions. But the first question is, in regard to Operation Margarine and Barthes' examples of the army and the church, can you think of other common examples that problems have been acknowledged but made trivial in the grand scheme of things? Would you take the red or blue pill? Which is better? And does media affect the way you examine different situations? Thank you for listening to our presentation. Hope you all have a great day.